Hey, we are two Star Wars nerds, and we're starting something new. And so we did a poll of this in the Discord. This is an idea that you actually had, which is really cool. We're going to be doing a book club where we're going through the books that we're reading and breaking them down into more, I guess, bite-sized segments, but that we can actually discuss them more. We'll still have like overarching reviews and maybe even live streams about books and things like that. But whether you are reading along in the book or you just want to enjoy the ride of just a longer form discussion, either way you're welcome, but let's get into it. All right, so for the inaugural video for the book club, we're doing Dark Force Rising, the one that we're currently both reading. We had a poll in the Discord of whether to go back to Heir to the Empire, to start here, to start with the next one, or whatever. It was pretty split, but the majority were saying start with what you're going through now, Dark Force Rising. So it is book 2 in a trilogy, but nonetheless, it's all good. So we actually are going to have this all chaptered out as well in YouTube, so you can come back and go to the chapter that you want if you want to talk about that. But I think the way that we're going to do this is we're just going to go chapter by chapter and just talk through it, different thoughts and things like that. And this isn't like a rating or ranking or anything. It's just a book club. It's a discussion. Yeah. So chapter 1. First off, I think it's awesome because it picks up right after Heir to the Empire. Yep. Yeah, it's really cool. I think Timothy Zahn, I think his writing is a little bit stronger in this compared to the last one. I think there's some growth there from what I've seen.
Well, I think it's because the characters are more developed too, so he can just get right into the story and what he doesn't have to lay as much of a character foundation. Yeah,
no, that's very true, and it did take a little bit in Heir to the Empire. You're trying to figure out who is this? What's going on?
Especially when that was my first book in the EU.
Yeah, it's a little different. There's so much new that's happening.
Right.
But it starts in a very similar fashion to all the Star Wars movies and to even Heir to the Empire. But you have Thrawn and Pelion searching for Card, and so just right off the bat, and Mirkir, maybe that's how you say it. I'm not sure.
I just make up all the pronunciation because I don't know any of it. And then I talk to you about it and you're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, Karad.
Yeah, and Bib Fash and all this stuff. Well, because, the first time I actually listened to the audiobook for Heir to the Empire. True. And so I had a narration of it. Right. I had a pronunciation. Where now I'm, even though I have the audiobook, I'm reading through this one. But so even right off the bat, this is the whole thing on, we'll just say Mirkir for the sake of it.
Let us know if we're saying it wrong.
Yeah. But this is the thing with cards like Hideout and a central base, and then there's the neighboring town, and there's the ATs, the AT-ATs and the ATSTs and all that. And there's this whole space observation from the Chimera down to the ground, and you see right off the bat Thrawn's military strategy at play.
Wild.
Yeah, and it's a thread throughout the whole book, and obviously throughout
probably the trilogy.
Yeah, for sure. But even the relationship between Pelion and Thrawn seemed a little bit different than Heir to the Empire. It was pretty interesting. But even when I like how they bring in how he talks about art, how Thrawn's Card looks at, or his, basically, not his species, but basically where he comes from, they like this kind of art. And so you're starting to see more of his strategy and how he breaks things down. Strategy. Yeah.
Because really art is telling you about a culture, and the culture tells you about those people. So it's brilliant, actually.
Yeah, it is, and I'm finding more and more that I'm liking Thrawn. It's very, very. He's very interesting. He's very intriguing, very intelligent, always ahead.
What I actually really like too is I don't know if everyone likes it, but I like Rebels, and so I saw Rebels obviously before getting into the EU. So like it's cool that I can just envision his character and even his voice. Like I hear the voice from Rebels when Thrawn talks, and it helps just create this imagery in my mind and really put me in the story. And even in Rebels, they talk about the art, so it was cool. Even that thread was really cool.
Yeah, and that's almost a side note too, because I'll be really interested to see what I think of Rebels after reading this, because I've heard mixed things about people who went through these books first and then watched Rebels. So I'll be interested. But yeah, nonetheless, I think Timothy Zahn does a great job of world building and plunging you in, and it's very vivid, and yes. I think he does a great job there. But this is where essentially what Thrawn is trying to do is because it's picking up right after Heir to the Empire. He's trying to draw out Card and Mara Jade, and he's trying to figure out where they are. And so there's all these things where it's like, well, our troops can get good ground practice, if they do this. We don't necessarily need to destroy this, but if they're spies, we'll watch this neighboring city and we'll see them draw out. So there's all these things go on, and the whole time they're hiding behind an asteroid, basically watching the Chimera.
Right.
And I found that really interesting, because then even eventually Thrawn is like, do a scan of this asteroid, and Pelion's like, well, we already did it and there wasn't anything there. How do you think that they would somehow leave and be there? But that's where Thrawn brings in the art, and he's talking about it. He's like, they're most likely there, right. Like everything's pointing to that, and he's right. And even a side note, I don't think that I wonder what you think. I don't feel like it's forced. I feel like it fits the characters. Like, it's not like, oh, okay, Thrawn again, he knows.
No, I think they do a really good job at it, because it's not just like, oh, and because of his wisdom, Thrawn knew. Like, they're building the art, they're building these backstories. So then when it's like, man, he figured it out again, it's like, well, I saw it coming, because he's an amazing villain, and he's not just brute force. There's wisdom really behind him. And so I feel like it lays that story, so then when these things do happen, it's like, yeah, makes sense. And the foundation was already laid, rather than like, well, Thrawn and his brilliance did this. There was already that foundation. Yeah, and that's how I feel as well. I think Timothy Zahn does a really good job. Yeah, really good job with that. And two really interesting things that happen in chapter 1. First, I think it's a great intro chapter. I think there's a lot of intrigue and excitement in Heir to the Empire's first one, but I feel like it's stronger in this one. But maybe it's because it's just continuing, right? Off the cliffhanger of Heir to the Empire. And luckily we had the next book, so we could go right in and not have to wait. Yeah, that's what's good about going through the EU now. I don't have to wait for anything. I don't have to wait years in between books and stuff. Right. But yeah, you see Mara Jade being, I guess, more attuned to the Force and her Force sensitivity. And throughout the book, you see it a little bit more too. But in this chapter, basically you see that she's kind of plagued by the Force. She describes it as there's these tingles, and then there's the power, and then she's afraid of the dreams that are to come. But basically, she has this idea: if I can just kill Luke, maybe that will stop. And yeah, it's just in this video we'll talk about her more, but I'm like, she's an amazing character. I like her a lot. And then you cut to Sabaoth on Jomark, I don't know, on some planet that he's been sequestered to. And basically it's this whole thing where he is just waiting for Thrawn to hold up his end of the deal, right, and to deliver Leia's unborn children to him. Also, he believes that Luke is coming to him, but he specifically is like, I want the payment that I was promised. But yeah, I mean, overall for chapter 1, how do you feel about it?
I thought it was a great beginning chapter, and I like you said in the beginning, liked how it just literally picks up where it was left off in the story, and like having both the books back to back, I could just go into the next one, and it was like just flowed right in. And so I really, really liked the flow. I liked the foundation that was being laid for this book, the story that's unfolding, and I think it was a really good way to start the book.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm enjoying it a lot. It feels like a really easy read, but a good read. You know, it's not oversimple, but it's like there's a lot of depth, and but it reads easy.
Well, the thing is with Dark Force Rising, I started reading it before you.
Yeah.
So I'm over halfway through the book. So he just started Dark Force Rising, so his memory's a little more fresh than mine is.
Yeah, for sure.
With the beginning, but I do remember these important parts, and so obviously you have more to say right now. But as we get further in the book, I'll remember better. Yeah,
and one thing I was gonna do, but I didn't. I was gonna do a sardonic account. Because he says it a lot.
I feel like he says it less though.
He does say it less, but he adds in like
dryly.
He does add in dryly, and he adds in like twist of the lip, or like twisting lip, or something like that. And he describes like like Mara Jade had twisted her lip, and like George Sabaoth twisted his lip, and all this. I'm like, damn.
How do you twist your lip?
I don't know what that means. It was some weird. Like, no, it's like a frown. I don't know what that means, to twist your lip. I was just like, okay. I mean, I get it's some intense, stress or something. I don't know.
Chapter 2.
So, in pretty right fashion with the way Timothy Zahn writes the books, he kind of dedicates a chapter to each component. So it's
for the most part.
Yeah, and he blends a lot more, I'd noticed, but typically it's either Empire or Rebels, back and forth, or it's like kind of Thrawn, Sabaoth centered, or like Mara centered and Card, but then like Luke and Han. This one's like a Luke chapter for sure. So this is the one where you find out that he is stranded at a space station. Basically, he needs his X-Wing repaired, and it's taking a lot longer than it needs to be. There's all this kind of bureaucracy of like how he has to get it repaired and the parts and all of this. And basically, you hear that he wants to get to Coruscant, which is really cool that you keep seeing Coruscant come in, especially knowing like the timeline and that he was the one who really came up with Coruscant. But basically, there's this kind of uprising against Admiral Akbar, and all that has to be sorted out. And he wants to be there, and he doesn't even know if he can affect any change. But nonetheless, he wants his X-Wing repaired. Yep. Lando is brought in, which is really cool.
Love Lando.
Yeah, Lando's great. And, Lando's basically being himself, and he's talking about...
Yeah, he wrote him really well.
Yeah, and, I can like hear the voices of all of the original actors, and I'm like, yeah, this feels just so right on. It feels like such a good continuation.
Yeah.
But yeah, Lando, just being Lando, he's even kind of talking about like investments that he's made, and how he's like worried about the plummeting prices and all this. But this is where he smells like kind of like an aroma on Luke, and it's from some guy, Niles Ferrier, and he's like, we need to go find this guy because he's here and he's gonna try and steal my ship, or not a ship, it's like the mine diggers, or I don't remember exactly what they are, but some equipment. But yeah, Luke has a really cool force skill that shows up. It's like a short-term memory enhancement. It's almost like a VHS tape that he can like like play in his mind. I thought that was like a really cool force skill. Yeah, and this is where Niles is basically the spaceship thief who's hired by the Empire to steal warships.
And he's got a scent.
Yeah, it's because of the like cigara, I think is
Yeah.
what they call it, that he smokes. But yeah, so there's just basically the whole kind of like standoff, pretty typical fashion thing that happens. There's a lot of cool stuff, you know, like Luke deflecting the blaster bolts and all that fun stuff. But what I found most interesting out of this chapter, it's pretty much just kind of action and moving the story along.
Yeah.
But what I found interesting is that Lando calls out that he's got Luke with him, and this is the guy who killed Vader. And so I was like, that's interesting. I don't know if that's really his reputation or if that's just something that's like a rumor that's floating around. They don't really, and I mean, maybe in other places they say, but it makes sense. People are like, oh, Luke Skywalker, you know,
Right.
guy who killed the Emperor and Vader, you know, it's pretty interesting. And even how Luke's like, well, that's not right, but
Right.
yeah. I said way too much on that. You got to interact more. Say some stuff about chapter 2.
I kind of already said it, but I liked Lando and just his interactions. It's interesting to see the beginning of the Akbar and, you know, eventually Mon Mothma stuff. So it's laying that foundation because it's really integral to the story. And at first, like, even when I'm reading it, I'm like, wait, what the heck? Like, what's going on with Akbar? But it's just laying this, you know, this foundation. And I think it's funny that Lando smelled a scent and he's like, oh, I know who that is. And it just makes, like, what if someone was like, oh, yep, I smell Mr. Two Star Wars Nerds was here. I smell his scent.
Yeah.
No, I don't have any problem with that. I think it's funny and I love it. But it's definitely something that sticks out in this chapter, and I don't know if that was the...
It was kind of a weird detail when he's like, hold on, Luke. Like, I smell, and he had like all the ingredients. And he's like, there's only one man that could be. It's like,
okay.
Okay, then. Well, to be fair, yeah, in our job, we're youth pastors, so we work with teenagers a lot. There's this one game that we had that's basically like, in this building, all the lights go out and everybody hides all over the building. And you like search for everybody, like kind of hide and go seek, but with like this really crappy flashlight. And so you were the one who was actually searching, and I was like sequestered away under some table with like trash cans in front of me and stuff. And you were walking by and you like stopped and you said, like Lando,
I did.
You're like, I smell him. It's because of my cologne. Like, I put off this aroma where you found me. So it's like,
it's real life.
It is real life. But it is kind of a weird detail.
It doesn't bother me. It's just, I like it.
Interesting, yeah. Well, let's go on to chapter 3. A lot of this stuff, obviously, early in the book, it's just setting up things for later. Heir to the Empire was the same way. There was a lot of foundation.
Which we need for a good story.
Yeah, there's a lot of intrigue and there's a lot of tension that's being built. Because especially past the halfway point, things are going to start picking up. And then near the end, that's when the big heavy hitters come.
Right.
But chapter 3 is a Han and Leia and Akbar centered chapter. And I found this hilarious. At the very beginning, it's talking about how, like, so you have obviously Luke and R2 doing their thing. You have
best friends.
Leia and Chewbacca from Heir to the Empire. They're doing their thing. And Han and 3PO get stuck together. And it's just such a funny combo. Like,
it's the best combo.
That'd be so good to see. And I love the way Han describes it, how essentially he's kind of doing it for Leia, like being nice to 3PO, and it's like he's trying.
It's a good husband.
And like right off the bat, like it said, like day one, he kept him in the cockpit and he tried to be friends with him. And basically he's annoyed. And then day 2, he's kind of keeping 3PO like distanced.
Distance, yeah.
And 3PO's like yelling down the corridor like to him. talking, and then day 3 he banished him from his presence. He literally was like, stay away from me. You can't deal with him. I just thought that was hilarious. Like, that would be such a funny, like, thing to see.
Yeah.
Just like how annoyed.
And I can just picture Harrison Ford, like, as Han Solo.
Yeah, just incredibly annoyed with Anthony Daniels as C-3PO. That'd be so funny to see. But yeah, this is where Han arrives in Coruscant, and pregnant Leia comes up, and you even see more of the family aspect, more of the love aspect. Total reversal of the trash of the sequels. Yeah, it's good. But yeah, what I found is really quickly there's this kind of like reunion, but then more specifically you find out there. I mean, this is like a politic heavy chapter. Do you
the books?
Yeah. But do you like the politics sections?
Yeah, I do. I understand them a lot more, than when I was a kid trying to watch The Phantom Menace. But I think politics almost dictate how we live and like culture, and so they're an important part of the story, and they are what lays a foundation, and especially in the rebellion and the politics, I guess, of the rebellion. You definitely see how it impacts each character individually, but also how it impacts them as a team, I guess, a team of rebels, for lack of a better word. But yeah, so I like it because it's not just in there for a statement or anything. Like, it's literally laying a story, and the politics affect the story, and they're not made for any other reason but then to tell a good story. And so they build up the story, and they create the story that we see our favorite characters going into. So I don't mind them at all, and I think it helps just kind of being able to understand more what's actually going on.
Yeah, I was curious because I would say you've become more interested in, like you said, as you get older, more interested in politics, both in like the Star Wars universe, but just understanding how, like,
well, you have to.
It's like it's just the way things are.
Right.
But I think he does a really good job because you get to see, especially right after Return of the Jedi, it's like, what's going on? Like the Empire was overthrown. There's this remnant that exists, but yeah, like, how is the New Republic like being formed, and how's it functioning, and what is Leia's role? And so it's cool when you see like, oh, Mon Mothma and Akbar, and you see these names and stuff. And then you're like, dang, like, it is really messy, and it's like, it's cool being like the Han who comes in and does this thing, or like the Luke, but then you see like Leia and how she's even like, man, I wish I could like use the Force to kind of like,
she's kind of just stuck dealing with it.
Yeah, she really is. But that sacrifice, it's very interesting. But this is where you see Leia is dealing with the charges of treason against Akbar, and Akbar's on house arrest. And so basically he's kind of been like leading the military, and there's these accusations brought against him, and I don't know if you find it out in this chapter or if it's in another one. I think it's this one. I think it is, but basically you find out that there was like some really shady stuff with some like bank accounts, and like a ton of money from this certain region was put into his account. So all this stuff where they're like and basically charges of treason are brought up against him, specifically by this Bothan. I don't know how to pronounce any of this stuff. I should, since I'm a Star Wars nerd. But anyways, yeah, there's a lot of intrigue about it. But yeah, this is basically Leia kind of sets Han up. Like, she's like walking with him, talking, and takes him like to like the Senate chambers, and he's like, what the, like, you kidding me? And like right away, Mon Mothma wants to question him about the Sluis Van shipyard, and the whole crazy stuff that happened in Heir of the Empire. And you know, it's interesting. We've already kind of talked about the politics. Reminds me a lot of the prequels, actually. But he lets it slip that there's a Grand Admiral, and they all start freaking out. And they're like, well, it's impossible. Like, we've tracked all of them. And he's like,
you missed one.
And he's describing him. And he's like, he's blue and he had red eyes. They're like, well, that doesn't make sense because the Emperor didn't like non-humans.
Right.
And so, yeah, all this really interesting stuff is kind of kicked up. Then they visit Akbar on home arrest, house arrest, rather. And they're talking with him and just kind of plotting for how are they going to take care of this stuff. And I think that's where Han decides that he is going to go to this planet basically that the bank transfer would have happened from, and he's going to do some investigation. And then I think that's the same chapter where Leia is like, well, Chewie and I they're going to go talk to, I don't even know how to pronounce his name, but Nogri, yeah. They're going to go talk to that one something. Yeah. They're going to go talk to him, and she's like, I said I would help them, and I'm like,
Lady Vader.
Yeah, Lady Vader. I would totally just like trying to ignore the Nogri, but then it's part of Thrawn's plan. You see this, like, it's this crazy web.
Yep.
Well, let's go to chapter 4. So, chapter 4. This is where Luke is looking through records, and the way it reads in the book is really cool because it's like you're looking at the records with him. Just the formatting, super interesting.
Yeah, super.
But yeah, Luke is looking. There we go. Luke is looking through Joris Sabaoth's records. And at this point, they aren't, like, when we read it, obviously there's Joruis with the 2 U's, and then there's Joris, like the original, but they haven't come to that conclusion yet. So it's that really interesting, what is that, third person perspective where, like, we see things that they don't. So yeah, he's looking through stuff, and there's some stuff that's hidden and some things that are very interesting. But yeah, also in this chapter, I mean, I don't feel like a whole ton happens in this one. Just some more groundwork stuff. But the Bothon, I don't know, Felia?
Works for me.
Okay. That Bothon, if that's even how you say Bothon. Luke, Han, and Leia are looking into him as well because he seems suspiciously postured against Akbar. And so yeah, that's pretty interesting to see. They're catching on to something, you know, and they're looking into it. And then I have it here. This is actually the one where Leia decides to go talk with the Nogri.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, is there anything that stands out from your memory or from notes about this one?
I think it's crazy that Leia, how brave she is, and even that she is willing to go talk to this alien group that try to murder her, even while being, like, pregnant. Like, she doesn't, yes, she is protecting them and she's taking care of, you know, her babies in the womb, but she doesn't let it slow her down either. And so I think that's just it's still Leia. Like, she's not stopped by anything. She is who she has always been. And so I just really like that aspect that nothing really slows her down, but you do see her get a shift where you know, she starts getting those motherly instincts, and she's thinking about the protection, and she has to do things a little bit differently, but she doesn't stop what she's doing.
Yeah, and I found it interesting too when her and Han were kind of arguing about it, and Chewie was off in the corner, like, upset, but when they were arguing, she even like Han brings up like, oh, well, what about, the twins? And what about my kids?
Right.
And she's
Fair
like very
question.
well aware that this may end in their death and my death. But she's like going with those instincts, and she's going with I need to do this. But just like, man, I can't imagine that, so it's, especially now as parents, like that's not the point of it, but
Right.
like having that perspective, reading like, man, that's really crazy.
One side note, I'm just thinking about how I felt when I was pregnant. She obviously is not going through the normal pregnancy symptoms, or I'm like, man, she's just on another level. If she's feeling terrible and throwing up and not able to keep anything down, but she's like going on these diplomatic missions regardless.
Well, I bet Han just thinks she's like crazy. I'm like, man,
I kind of think she's crazy.
my pregnant wife is like nuts, but she's pregnant, so what am I supposed to tell her?
Yeah, you can't fight with a pregnant woman.
It just doesn't work.
No,
There's no winning. Yeah.
it's true.
But, it's I like that interplay, and knowing things in the EU about how Luke and Han and Leia end up in some of the family decisions. It's like it's really cool. Like,
and I love
seeing
seeing
it from the beginning.
Yeah, Han is a dad. Like
Yeah.
even before he can hold his babies. Like he already loves them, and you can see that he wants to protect them, and he wants what's best for them. And that's what I always expected. What would be next for Han and Leia, and so it's just so cool to read it and see it in my mind. Because that's a beautiful thing, is I can take the characters that I saw, in the original, and I play the movie in my mind of what I'm reading.
Yeah.
And I get what I want. I get to see Han as a good dad before he even gets to hold his babies. Like he's like, I'm already a dad, even with the babies in the womb.
Yeah, and you touched on something that I think is really important for how Timothy Zahn writes, is he writes in a way, and maybe it's just because we read a lot, but he writes in a way where I feel like the camera's positioned in a certain place, and I'm seeing scenes, and I'm seeing the camera changes.
Yeah.
And it is really vivid. Because sometimes, like if you pick up a book, and you're reading like hard science fiction, it's like the gobbledygook jargon. You have no idea what it's saying for pages. Or there's times where you're just like, oh, this is so like technical, or there's so much dialogue, I don't even know what's happening.
Right.
But he doesn't tell you everything, but he shows you a lot. And that's what I like. So when you are dealing with Han and Leia on Coruscant, and obviously it helps with the movies and stuff.
Yeah.
But there's things that are different, but I can see it.
Right.
And it's like, I feel like
we're there.
Yeah, and that's really cool. So even the slow chapters, like this one was kind of a slow one, but it's like,
slow doesn't mean bad.
Yeah, it's like I'm there, and I'm seeing this stuff take place. It's really cool. Okay, on to chapters 5 and 6, the last two chapters that we are covering in this particular video. Chapter 5, this is a really cool chapter. I think out of the 6 in this video, I feel like this one's my favorite. So Card and Mara Jade are in their hideout on Rishi, and it's this really interesting planet where it's almost describes like there's all these town, or at least the city, like City Vault or City Vale that they're in. I don't know. I don't even know what that is. But the city that they're in, it's like all these crammed townhouses next to each other, and it's just talking about like the interesting kind of like glass structure of like the houses and stuff, and that there's just like so many people walking around, and it's just really crazy. And essentially Mara's like, why did you pick such a public place to hide? And again, this is picking up from one of the prior chapters where when Thrawn found them behind the asteroid, and other ships come in, all this, they like take off, just like right at the right time, because Mara's like freaking out. Forgot to mention that Mara was freaking out,
right?
And she's like, they're on to us. And
yeah, she knew.
Yeah. We talked about the Force but we didn't talk about how it
Right.
actually manifested. But anyway, so I think everybody's kind of like, wow, like Mara knew that Luke was here, or Luke was doing this in Heir to the Empire. Now she knew about Thrawn, so they're kind of like the elephant in the room. They're not really talking about it. You know, it's very interesting. But Card goes on this whole thing just kind of randomly. You know, he's just starts opening up, and he talks about the Katana Fleet, or Dark Force. Bah, I love when the title comes in. You're
Yeah.
like, yeah, there we go. But the Dark Force is 200 or so Dreadnought class heavy cruisers, big old ships, and basically these would take thousands and thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people to run one ship. And these were like the pride and joy of basically kind of like old Republic, you know, prequel era, you know, and before they switched to droids, they basically had these like slave rigged ships. So basically this whole fleet would move, and if something happened, I don't know if it was exactly to like the central ship or to one of them, but basically they would all kick into hyperdrive and move to another location. So it's supposed to be this like crazy system where you don't have to rely on like losing all these ships. They all move in sync.
Right.
Tons and tons of money poured into it, and basically you find out that it's kind of like a hidden treasure, kind of like a pirate kind of story, where it's like one time they went out and no one knows where they went, and people sell like fake maps and all this, but Card knows where they are. You kind of think he's full of it, but then he tells this kind of tall tale, but it seems true that he just came across them by chance because his hyperdrive didn't fully function right. And there's this whole discussion about whether or not to go get them, because it's been 15 years. They can sell them to the Empire. And there's the profit. And so again, it's politics. It's like 20% over asking price, basically. But then he's like, well, I think that the Empire's going to fail. But Mara's like, but Thrawn's after us. Or we can give him to the New Republic. All this stuff. Anyway, so there's a lot of discussion about that. But before I keep rambling on, what did you think of all that Katana Fleet Dark Force stuff? Because obviously you've read farther too, so you have more insight.
Yeah.
But what did you think of that?
Well, I'm going to try to save that for the later chapter videos, but I think this is like where you first find out about them. And like, yeah, you see the title, the Dark Force. And so then you're starting to, you know, put things together and see like, okay, because when you pick this up, I'm like, Dark Force Rising, what is that? And so now, you know, I'm like, okay, like it's like you said, tying in the title, it's continuing to build that story. And then you're like, man, this guy, and I haven't finished it yet. I'm a little over halfway through, but even from this moment, I'm like, man, I hope this guy gives them to the right people, you know. But obviously when it says Dark Force Rising, I'm like, I can assume what's going to happen. But yeah, I thought that was really cool. And that's not what I was expecting from Dark Force Rising, was these crazy ships, or cruisers, or whatever you want to call them. So I think it was really cool. And then I like how important it makes Card and Mara to the storyline.
It took Card from like, kind of like, why is he so important? And then like, oh,
this is why.
Okay.
Yep. And like later on, obviously, I was telling you, I was like, I can't even remember because I haven't read about them in so long. And so I was telling you, I'm like, was that in Heir to the Empire or is that in this? But like, he's such an important character already, and doesn't even have that much in the book yet, but he's got the key to the title here. So it's pretty crazy. Yeah,
and you're so right, where it's like, oh, who is he gonna give this to? Because it's like, you can see like, man, Thrawn can do some damage, and that's short-term profit. Or he's like, but then it's like, will Thrawn just take him out?
Right.
regardless, or will the New Republic get them? And what's interesting, because you see like New Republic, but then you also see Rebels, the rebellion.
Mm-hmm.
How that's even an interesting point in these two chapters, 5 and 6, how they're referenced as a Republic or the New Republic by Mara Jade and Card.
Mm-hmm.
And that even makes Mara mad that they would consider giving it to them.
Right.
But then Thrawn addresses them as the rebellion.
Right.
Like he still refuses to say that you've won.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, very, very interesting. And I like how it plays out a lot, because there's so much where I'm like, am I seeing like all these pieces like come together, but there's a lot of mystery. It's very interesting.
And then this mystery man who follows Mara, that was such a cool scene to read.
Yeah.
Like I felt like I was behind just the way everything was described and the details. Like that's one, even though like I said I'm further along, I remember that vividly, like reading that scene. And not that it was like this super great thing, but just the way it was written and how it progresses, the story was super, super cool. So that's I think one of my favorite scenes to read so far because of the detail.
Yeah, and I would be interested for people who really like Mara Jade, where you started liking her. For me, this is where I started liking her. Like this scene. Like I didn't really care for her too much up until now. I mean, there's not really much of her, but this was the scene.
I have a question.
Yeah.
This may be a big spoiler and maybe people think I'm crazy for not knowing this. Is she a Jedi?
Is she a Jedi?
Yeah.
It's a little complicated, but I mean, she's absolutely force sensitive. Yeah.
Okay. Because this is my only experience out of the Empire and Dark Force Rising, but I've seen pictures with her with a lightsaber, and she knew how to handle Luke's as well. And then obviously she's force sensitive, so I was like, oh, like.
Yeah, there's a whole ton of stuff I won't spoil. And if you didn't know, if you're 40-something minutes into this video with us, my thing is I've read a lot about the EU, but I haven't read it for myself, so I'm going through reading it for myself, getting that more depth. And so there's things where it's like I've surface level know, like bullet points.
I pretty much know nothing.
Just totally fine. I mean, I'm enjoying this a lot. But what I thought was really cool about that scene is when she like notices him and tries to act like,
Yeah, she picked up on it quick.
I don't see him, and then she's like trying to lose him, and then sees his footprints, and then it's like running, and then he pulls a fast one on her. All this, and you're basically when he catches her, you see her Empire training where she's like analyzing everything, and she's like, okay, he doesn't know I have this blaster. I can't kick something at him. I can't slip off my boot to kick off at him. But then she's like, oh, like I can. She's remembering her training with the Emperor. She's like, I can like basically, and it's weird because then it's like the whole force. But then she's like, I can pull this stuff down. Then you find out, yeah, Thrawn hired him. And it was pretty brutal when she just like boom, one shots him in the head, kills him dead in the street. Pretty cool. I will say though, I got really excited and then disappointed because at first when I saw Dengar, I like lit up, but then when it's like, oh, it's probably a fake ID and it's Dengar Roth, I'm like, dang. And so then I looked up Dengar Roth, and he's just some kind of like not a low level bounty hunter, but kind of a low level bounty hunter who uses his name Dengar in a similar fashion, but not as exciting as Jodo Cast, with Boba. But he uses Dengar to basically get bigger jobs and to frighten people. So I was like,
smart business move.
Yeah, I was like, dang, did she kill Dengar? Nah, just some wannabe Dengar. But then they find out there's huge bounties on them.
Yep.
Card kind of reminds me of Hondo a little bit.
Yes.
I wonder if that was intentional. It has to be. Yeah, I feel like that was definitely what they're going for.
Chapter 6.
Chapter 6. So you see in this last chapter that we're covering, battle between the Chimera and the Rebellion. Already drew the interesting dialogue there, how Thrawn calls it the Rebellion instead of the New Republic.
Right.
Fascinating little details. But yeah, essentially this is where the Rebellion, the New Republic, they're kind of like converting like stock ships or kind of like store ships to like carry fighters, but they already anticipated they had fighters, so they sent out like a TIE squadron, and this battle ensues. And this is where you find out that Thrawn is responsible for Akbar's charges of treason, specifically because he wanted to sow discord into the New Republic.
Makes his enemy easier to take down if they're not unified.
And there was a really good line. Maybe I should have actually had it ready in the book. There's a really good line where he's talking about like concentration and focus, and all of these things separate warriors basically versus like a fighter. And he's saying, I'm a fighter, you know, like, or I'm a warrior, like I'm very strategic, I think through things, but you see that he's always 2 steps ahead. He has a plan for Akbar. He has a plan for the Rebellion.
He has a plan for everything.
Yeah, like literally he's dedicated himself to just consistently and constantly think through everything. And I love how he describes his strategy as economics and psychology. So he's like interesting that basically a war general, a grand admiral, would say, I'm more interested in economics and psychology. Basically,
I think that's what makes him a good war general.
Yeah, and there isn't a whole lot here. Basically, Thrawn's kind of like explaining why he does what he does. At one point, basically, he's saying we're going to withdraw the TIE fighters, we're going to withdraw our troops. And then he's like, why? Why don't we just destroy them? He's like, we don't need to destroy them. Like, we need to basically just let them not really know what's going on. And he's saying we go and we randomly attack these trade routes. And he's like, because then what they're going to do is they're going to say, hey, we need more support. So they're going to, New Republic's going to put resources to supporting these trade routes. Or
so we can weaken them.
Yeah, or they're just going to freak out. And yeah, it's all about weakening them. But yeah, specifically, he keeps bringing up this Delta source. So they're talking about like intelligence communities that they have, but then he's the only one who knows about Delta source. And so there's a lot of intrigue there. He's always talking about the Mount Tantus campaign. And so he's building that up a lot. They talk about Sabaoth and like the Asalamiri, I think that's how you say it. And so there's just a lot of more interesting things being laid out about this. Before we do the final kind of closing on Sabaoth, is there anything I know I just kind of gave like a big overview, but what are your thoughts on all that stuff?
I think Sabaoth is a really interesting character, and he doesn't, at least up to this point, he hasn't done or said a lot in this book. But he's just, I don't know, he's just so, I don't know, I can't figure him out.
Kooky? He's crazy.
Yes.
He's insane.
He's crazy, but like, I don't know. I don't want to get into further in the book, but just how he's just, he thinks he knows things, and I mean he does, like, you know, even with Luke and all that.
Well, what one thing that was,
dude. I don't know what to make of him.
Me neither, and I think that's how everybody is. Only Thrawn really gets him. But even
I
how
guess Pelion is always like, what the heck is wrong with this guy?
Yeah, Pelion was like pissed, you know, and
right.
He's like, hey, what are you gonna do with him? You know, and because basically Thrawn kind of perceives, he's like, hey, you're still mad about this. He's like, well, yeah, I disobeyed. And he's like, well, what do you want? And Thrawn makes a joke. And he's like, what do you want me to, like, demote him? Or, like, dock his pay? And Paleon's like, well, I'm serious. Right. He's like, yeah, so am I. He's like, what do you, he's not going to, we have to bend the rules to him because he's a weapon.
Right.
And so he just is using Sabaoth. And then
part of his ultimate plan.
Yeah. And what's cool is when Paleon's like, well, what are you going to do with him? If he turns against us, he's like, oh, that's what the Ysalamari are for. So initially that will stop him.
Right.
He's like, well, what about Passa? He's like, I will take care of him.
Right.
Like, I personally, which is like, oh, that's terrifying.
Yeah. So, I mean, it just lays this continued groundwork of Sabaoth, and he intrigues me.
For sure. But then again, you go to, like, the high tower that he's kept in, with Sabaoth, and basically this whole thing, like, he perceives this messenger coming. And really weird. I'm like, was he nude or was he not? Because he, like, stands up and, like, uses the Force to bring a robe on his body. I'm like, I would assume he's just, like, in some pants or something. But I'm like, it was a very weird detail where he's, like, bringing the robe around his body and tying it with the Force. I'm like,
if you had the Force, you would do that.
Probably. I'd do everything with the Force.
You would.
But then Sabaoth basically is thinking about how, sorry for our cat there. Sabaoth is basically thinking about how he wants to bend Luke to his will, like he's done with everybody else. That's kind of it.
Yep.
Just boom. And, he's like getting ready for the messenger to tell him. And it's like, as his mouth opens, the chapter ends. Timothy Zahn is great at cliffhangers. He's really good at them. So that is chapters 1 through 6. I feel like we're ready to review, but that's not the point of these. So yeah, whether you read chapters 1 through 6, let us know what your thoughts are. If you've read Dark Force Rising before, talk to us about it. Join the Discord, all of these things. Essentially, what we're doing, maybe we should have said this at the top as well, we're looking at doing one of these videos a week through every book that we read together.
Yes.
So after Dark Force Rising, we're going to go into The Last Command, and then I think what we're going to do is we're going to go back to everything post Return of the Jedi. So everything after the Return of the Jedi novelization, we're going to read all of those novels. And so eventually we'll get back to Heir to the Empire. Anyway, there's a whole thing about that. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed this book club. We're just basically documenting our process through the EU. And yeah, for real, if you've stayed this whole time, please join the Discord, become a part of the community, meet some really awesome people who love Star Wars and who are great people. But with that, we are two Star Wars nerds, and may the Force be with you always.